A big question, and just because of the number of all these lawsuits now, is this the new lawfare? On the list of legal fights from the left, they are now pressing lawsuits against President Trump's orders to end birthright citizenship, to stop sending transgender inmates to male prisons, and to put United States, the USAID workers, on leave. Vice President Vance, a Yale law graduate, posted, if a judge tried to tell a general how to conduct a military operation, that would be illegal. If a judge tried to command the attorney general and how to use her discretion as a prosecutor, that's also illegal. Judges are not allowed to control the executive's legitimate power. Phil Holloway now, former assistant district attorney, former police officer, and a legal advisor to the Georgia Sheriff's Department. Phil, good to see you. So first of all, your reaction to the vice president's words there, his post about you can't really jump on the executive's power this way.
Well, the vice president is exactly right, Harris. This is an anti-constitutional effort by the courts in many of these cases to simply substitute the judgment of an unelected judge for that of the duly elected president of the United States. And in many instances, like the case out of the Southern District of New York, which is the lawsuit brought by Letitia James and some other attorneys general, that even goes so far as to inject the courts into the relationship between the political supervision of federal agencies and the president of the United States and his authority. This is a clear anti-constitutional violation of separation of powers. Nobody disputes, Harris, that these courts are allowed to engage in judicial review if the Congress or the executive oversteps their constitutional authority in some other way. Yeah, they can issue an injunction, but just because the judge doesn't like what the president might be doing, that doesn't mean the judge gets to separate or inject his opinion and substitute his judgment for that of the president. It's unconstitutional. It's wrong.
Well,
it's lawfare 2.0 or 3.0, whatever the number is up to now. And the Justice Department,
and I want to get more into the lawfare part of it for certain, but I do want to get to this, Phil. It's a different, on this list of legal battles, another one. A federal court yesterday blocked the Trump administration from sending 3 detained Venezuelans to Guantanamo Bay. The president has promised to expand the prison to hold up to 30,000 criminal, violent, illegal aliens. New images now show the first plane arrivals there, and DHS Secretary Kristi Noem visited that site last week. And here's what she said about who actually is being held there.
I watched a plane load of people unload at Gitmo that were pedophiles, child pornographers. They were drug dealers in our communities that literally these cartels are partnering with the Chinese to kill our next generation of Americans. That's who we're putting down there at Gitmo.
So we know about what's happening in Gitmo. There's been transparency there. We also know that there's some challenges there. What's your take on it, Phil, legally?
Well, I think the concern with respect to those individuals going down to Guantanamo Bay might be something along the lines of whether they have access to counsel. That's a legitimate legal concern, but there's nothing inherently wrong, Harris, with the president housing or the administration housing individuals who are legitimately detained or arrested under the immigration laws. They're in the custody of the United States government. Where they are housed is more or less irrelevant. As long as they have access to counsel, basic constitutional due process safeguards are in place. That's perfectly fine. It's my understanding that that particular injunction might be going away. I hope that it does, because once the government offers assurances to the judge that, no, these people are going to have due process. Look, the people that were there, the terrorists that were there, the government was able to give them some type of due process. So that's not going to be a problem. I think in the long run, the president is going to be able to continue to use the facilities at Guantanamo Bay if that's what his judgment is.
So all of that, though, and I want to just quickly touch on this lawfare. And you're right. I mean, that's what I've been calling it. You called it 2.3. I think it's all part of the same chain, because it's a push against a man who was a candidate experiencing that, who's now president experiencing that. Your take?
Yeah, it is lawfare. It's the whole idea of the left is going to resist. They're going to take it to the courts. They're even taking it to the streets. They're doing everything they can to thwart the will of the American people who elected Donald Trump president. He said he was going to do these things. He is doing these things. It should not surprise anyone. At the end of the day, Harris, it is wrong for the courts to overstep their Article 3 power and try to basically inject themselves, the courts, into the operations of the executive branch. It's just not how our system of separation of powers was intended to work.
Well, and you're right about that. I mean, the American people, not only did they vote last November, but I mean, recent polling shows that they want the current president to keep going in majority forward with what he's doing. Phil Holloway, thank you so very much for your time.